Plain, but move aside so that others can board. Black CEO Elise offered her. Despite the fury building inside of her, her countenance remained calm as she boarded again. "I am in seat 2A, no mistake." A security agent then came up to his Elise's arm was instantly grabbed when she attempted to explain her predicament. As he started to drag her away from the entrance, his fingers pushed into her basic suit jacket. Other travelers saw some people are worried, some are unconcerned, and some even nod in agreement. But within 30, in a matter of seconds, the enormous departure displays all around the boarding gates became entirely black after the terminal flickered. Announcements over the PA system unexpectedly stopped as the electronic screens froze. Mid-sentence passengers' bewilderment at the terminal increased tenfold. Who had been getting on board abruptly halted. Airline employees gazed at their lifeless computer screens in unbelievably. Gate 37B was in utter turmoil, with passengers yelling at one another. Carry-on bags strewn all over the waiting area, airline employees desperately attempting to keep things organized but failing terribly. This wasn't your normal flight delay annoyance. There was something considerably more serious. This story illustrates the greatest karma that results from a lady who was disregarded and dismissed as nothing. Her identity was strongly exposed when she boarded the aircraft, and the airline was forced to apologize. Their choice. If you have ever experienced discrimination at the airport, please share your story. Comments type justice. Click the subscribe button immediately if you oppose discrimination and injustice. Since this tale of justice is only beginning, please leave a comment and let us know where you're viewing from. So who? What is Elise Washington precisely, and how did she have the authority to bring in Lisa's path to become one of America's most successful airlines? The most powerful tech CEOs are truly exceptional. In contrast to many industry, Elise came from nothing at all, and her mother worked for executives with wealthy backgrounds and high-level connections. At 16, they worked 3 jobs to maintain their standard of living in a community with few success stories. Elise was already demonstrating exceptional computer skills, but she was learning to code and repairing damaged equipment from pawn shops while teens were hanging out at the mall on a used computer that her high school instructor had saved. For her, this was survival, not simply a pastime. By the age of 17, she was earning enough money to fix computers for nearby companies to assist her mother with covering her rent. But the path was never simple. And even though she had excellent SAT scores, she was weight mentioned at all of the prestigious tech schools where she applied, and when she eventually received, she had to work 2 jobs and balance a full course load after being accepted into Northwestern on a partial scholarship. The trend persisted throughout college, and at her first IT job, she observed her white. She was elevated above less experienced male coworkers after she developed an inventive. Her manager claimed credit for the scheduling algorithm that saved the firm millions, and when she raised the issue, she was called challenging and uncooperative. Yet Elise never breaks builds, rather than opposing a system that was set up to hinder her progress. Her own system. She started Nexus by mortgaging everything she possessed at the age of 28. Technologies. Her studio apartment, the company's initial office, and its first workers. When she was unable to pay salary, 3 fellow grads who shared her idea were willing to work for equality. After 15 years, Nexus Technologies had more than 5,000 employees worldwide. $1.2 billion in claimed earnings. Elise Washington wasn't simply prosperous, she was a natural force that revolutionized an industry. On the morning of In Our Scenario, Ely was getting ready for what may be the most significant transaction of her professional life. She packed minimally for her trip in her penthouse condo with a view of Central Park. The Global Tech Innovation Summit in Singapore wasn't simply another gathering. Was where Elise would give the keynote speech that would convince Singapore to commit $500 million. The Sovereign Wealth Fund would finance this investment in addition to growing Nexus Technologies, their most complex endeavor to date. But Elise opted to go alone rather than with an entourage, as many CEOs do. Being alone herself on lengthy, overseas trips allowed her to reflect and be ready for the 20-hour drive that lies ahead. She wore comfortable, basic clothing, yet professionally, she may wear a fitted jacket, silk blouse, and black slacks. Her single luxury item was a pair of handmade leather shoes that she removed throughout the journey, loafers. As Elise made her way to the airport that morning, she had no idea that she would run into Bradley. Winters, the CEO of Sky Globe Airlines, was a guy whose vision propelled his business. Slamming into the earth, Sky Globe Airlines was, once America's pride. Established during the heyday of air travel, aviation has established a reputation for providing opulent service and exclusivity experiences. Their tagline, "The Sky's Elite," used to stand for ambition. At 68, under the direction of Bradley Winter, everything had completely changed. Third-generation airline executive Bradley Winter's grandfather had Bradley got the CEO role practically by birthright when his father started Sky Globe and developed it. Taylor Bradley, who wore custom clothes from London and had silver hair that was always precisely styled, looked like the distinguished executive, but looks may be misleading Elisa's town vehicle that morning. She tipped the driver lavishly as she drew up to the departures terminal, rolling her. She went inside the airport with her carry-on behind her, not realizing that this ordinary business trip would soon turn something anything but ordinary. Her day of annoyance started as soon as she entered the spinning doors of Terminal B at LaGuardia. Having made hundreds of first-class flights prior to approach the upscale check-in area, a distinct space with luxurious carpet, few wines, and attentively trained personnel, to the highest-paying clients of Sky Globe, but the gate agent arrived before she could even get to the desk. "Economy check-in is that way, ma'am," the agent stated after intercepting her. Disregarding the lengthy, winding queue in which hundreds of customers were waiting, Elise stopped, inhaled deeply, and said courteously, "I'm flying first, class to Singapore." As proof, she displayed her phone's digital boarding card, which the agent hardly looked at. She said, "Economy check-in is that way," and this time, with obvious irritation, it was the first small cut, a brief portion of the day that the majority of white tourists would never encounter. Instead of arguing, she went to the premium counter for Elise and was met by a different agent who completed her check-in without any problems, but not before making sure her reservation with obvious astonishment. After examining her bigger bag, Elise went to security with the VIP security line was almost empty, save for her briefcase and luxury carry-on. Was a first-class travel benefit that often made the expensive ticket costs worthwhile, but as Elise, she was waved out of the VIP lane by an official as she reached the TSA screening. "You must go through extra screening for the security check, ma'am." Police observed 3 white businessmen in expensive suits passed through the VIP lane without the same TSA agent giving them another look. All of the passengers in the increased screening queue who were chosen at random were people of color. The male TSA officer's pat-down went much above the norm when it was her time. Process. His hands hovered for too long. He repeatedly examined the same spots. Elise felt humiliated by his harsher-than-necessary touch, but she remained composed. She had long since realized that expressing anger would just make matters worse, and that she would be known as the irate black woman. Defending their treatment when she gathered her possessions following the test, she realized right away that her watch was missing. Not just any watch, but Philippe received a personalized computer costing more than $60,000 as a present. When Nexus Technologies went public, it represented more than just its financial worth. "Excuse me, I've conquered everything," she told the TSA officer. "My watch is absent. If it had been there, it would have passed through it." The agent hardly looked up. "Was there, and I put it in the trash myself." Elise spent the next 15 minutes insistent on seeing the security tape even though the agent said she must have left her watch at home. The watch was miraculously discovered by a supervisor after she refused to move and threatened to call her lawyer. Elise had never used bin 1 by the time she arrived at Gate 37B. Despite the security holdups, she had already started boarding her trip to Singapore. There was still time to board first-class passengers, usually board first or are offered the choice to board at their convenience. A gate agent greeted her as she got closer to the first-class boarding line. Was Meredith? Her name tag was prominently displayed, and she immediately regarded Elise suspiciously. "Excuse me, ma'am. This lane is." Elise held out her boarding card once again for our first-class passengers. "Yes, I know I'm in seat 2A, she said. Meredith scowled as she examined the boarding pass closely, as if it were written in a foreign language. Gazed up at Elise, clearly incredulous. "Please, 1 second." She picked up a phone and talked, quietly, periodically looking up at Elise with narrowed eyes. By this point, a number of people had started to observe the exchange. A manager went over to a man in his late 50s who had a perpetual frown engraved on his face. Richard. Bronson Customer Service was written on his name tag. "Supervisor, is something wrong here?" he inquired, addressing Meredith. Meredith said, "I have a first-class ticket," instead of addressing Elise. The term is emphasized as if Elise's assertion was at best questionable. After obtaining the boarding permit, Richard examined Elise from head to toe, observing her comfy, however obviously costly journey. "Well, ma'am, do you know that first-class tickets on foreign airlines are quite costly?" The question lingered, and its implications were obvious to everyone within hearing distance snickered, while others gazed. Uneasy but remained silent, Police's face remained unchanged. "We'll have to check your ticket. There appears to be a discrepancy," he said, the final statement as if he had discovered her deceit. "What anomaly?" Elise requested that I see further proof of the passport and credit card used for the purchase, and business approval for the expense. This wasn't typical practice. This wasn't necessary for other passenger harassment that was passed off as security procedure. By now, a number of passengers were using their phones to capture the exchange. One elderly white woman said loudly, "Just show if you have nothing to conceal your documents." Elise produced her passport and corporate credit card, but she correctly declined to display any business. Regardless of ticket class, authorization is a document that no airline requires for any passenger. Richard asked that you move aside while we confirm this information. The airplane must proceed boarding. Thus, while other first-class travelers boarded with only a quick look at their boarding passes, Elise was led away from the gate to a customer service booth. Assured that the verification would only take a little while, but those brief moments seemed to drag on. Elise sat at the desk and watched the minutes for more than an hour as they went from 20 to 40, tick by on her regained watch. But no explanations or updates were provided, and she inquired about the progress of her verification on several occasions, only to be informed, "We're working on it." She could see her gate from where she sat, could observe the last boarding calls being placed, and the jet bridge door gradually shutting, but what she could additionally, a group of Skylobe staff members were gathered at a neighboring counter, periodically looking in her direction and giggling, despite their best efforts to speak quietly in the crowded but acoustically harsh airport terminal. Bits and pieces of their discourse made it to her mind. It's likely her first time flying. Thus she deserves in first class. Every comment was a dagger, but I bet she won't be that brazen when she misses her flight. Observing her flight, which she had every right to be on, was what really got to me. The boarding door closed, and a seat she had paid thousands for left without her. She watched her plane taxi away through the enormous windows as the jet bridge pulled back. Richard didn't come back to the desk till after that. "I hate to notify you that while we were checking your details, you're without showing any genuine sorrow," he remarked. "The flight has departed. Unfortunately, you missed your boarding." "I missed my boarding time," yet Bisa's voice stayed calm in spite of the anger and hurt that were swelling inside of her. "Richard disregarded her claim because your workers purposefully held me under false pretenses. Fully. We can reschedule you for the next flight to Singapore, which leaves in around 5 hours, but I'm afraid we can give you an economy ticket as the first class is completely filled." This was the last insult. Not merely downgrading her and keeping the significant difference in fare show me instead of giving her the seat she paid for. Police, in charge of the booking system, requested that I view the first-class manifest for Elise stood and said, "That flight, ma'am, I'm not authorized to show me the system. Now, or I'll have my company's legal team check every record for that flight." Startled him because Richard abruptly moved the monitor in her direction. Did he believe she? We'll never know if he just panicked or wouldn't comprehend what she was looking at, but what Elise witnessed proved. According to her concerns, the next aircraft had 3 first-class seats available. "You are deceiving me," she stated plainly. 3 first-class tickets are available. Those are banned for operational reasons, but I'm not sure what those operational reasons are. Richard swiftly switched the monitor away. Elise stated that she was free to talk about discriminatory causes, her voice raising just enough to be heard by other travelers in the vicinity. You stopped me from getting on my first flight, and now you're lying about availability to prevent me from being in first class on the subsequent one. A number of other passengers had halted. Some others had their phones out to see the altercation as it happened, sensing that something important was taking place. I insist on being rescheduled for the following trip in first class as recompense for the acts of your personnel that caused me to miss my initial trip, Elise said forcefully. Red in the face, Richard said. Ma'am, I must beg you to lower your Elise answered in a carefully controlled voice. I will not be silenced when I'm being discriminated against, yet loud enough for anyone nearby to hear her plainly. That's when Richard made the decision that would eventually lead to his company's demise. He motioned to security, and 2 guards quickly arrived, and the taller one quickly and needlessly grabbed Elise's arm. Take your hands off me, he stated sternly. Ma'am, you must join us now. Elise responded, I have done nothing wrong. And the guard pulled her as he tightened his hold. Elise lost her ballots, phone, and paperwork as she abruptly moved away from the counter, strewn all over the floor, and when she leaned to get them, she saw a familiar figure observing the action from a close distance, even in the absence of the media. Bradley Winter's arrogant demeanor alone would have allowed her to identify him from the pictures she had seen. The CEO of Sky Globe was taking in the circumstances with what can only be called contentment. As the security personnel proceeded to remove her, she heard Bradley turn to a co-worker and whisper something that would eventually return to haunt him. Some folks just aren't aware of the very time she was being dragged across the location by force the airport, while other travelers gaped and murmured that Elise's phone, if you were in Elise's position, would you have consented to take the following trip in economy, or would you defend your position to stay in first class? Please share your opinions to ensure you don't miss these. Leave a comment below and remember to click the subscribe button. Elise Washington meticulously collected her dispersed papers off the floor. Her motions were methodical and unhurried, in spite of the security officers towering above her, and her phone kept play the personalized ringtone that identified Marcus Chen as her main tactic. Even in the middle of commotion, officer, she couldn't ignore this call. I need to take this, she told the guards, her tone making it obvious that Elise wasn't making a request. Other than keeping eye contact with the guards to make sure they didn't try to take her away physically once again. Marcus, she said, quickly turning to her business. Tone, how are everything going? What the security personnel failed to do understand. Anything that Bradley Winters, who was observing from a distance with smug delight that this call would mark the start of Sky Globe's demise. Our choice must be made by tomorrow, according to the Singapore Sovereign Fund's airline laws. Marcus frantically clarified. They must know whose airline we're suggesting the international corporate contract prior to completing the purchase. Paperwork. This was the initial discovery that would alter everything. Her business wasn't only a client of several airlines. They were doing the last assessment for a $3.7 billion worldwide corporate contract. The airline that won this deal would get billions of dollars over 5 years. Special travel arrangements for more than 40 global companies in the Sky Globe, a partner network of Nexus Technologies, had been considered along Elise's trip today, was scheduled to be the last assessment of Sky Globes with 2 other large carriers. They just failed a test called International First Class Service. I've seen enough, Elise said, unaware that they were being tested. Staring at Bradley Winters, as if he could hear her say, take away the sky. Take the globe into mind right now and draft the Singapore suggestion. Airlines instead. However, Marcus had more serious news. Elise is having another problem. Our stake in Sky Globe is causing the market to get uneasy, and there are rumors that we may be selling, Marcus stated. The second shocking revelation came from behind the scenes via Elise Washington, our private investing firm. Individually owned 28% of Sky Globe's equity. Together, they were the troubled airline's single largest ownership block, is much bigger than the majority of passengers seeing the spectacle had shares owned by the Winter family. Unaware that the abused lady had enough shares to devalue the business in a single sale. But Elise, the Singapore conference is about more than simply our suggestion. Marcus went on. Everyone is anticipating your keynote address to provide the go-ahead for our acquisition negotiations. And then the third revelation. Securing a $500 million investment wasn't the only goal of the Singapore conference. It concerned completing Nexus Technologies' purchase of the biggest rival of Aerosphere Airways' Skyglobe, an action that will drastically alter the aviation business for decades to come in the Asian market. The security personnel shuffled uneasily as they realized that this apparently ordinary circumstance was changing. One of them talked into his radio, revealing stuff much beyond their pay grade. Giving someone an update on the circumstances at Terminal B, Elisa's brain collaborated with the calculating accuracy that had established her as a tech industry superstar. She had developed a formula in less than 10 seconds. Strategy that would produce a strong business injustice. Dear Marcus, I need you to take immediate action. Get in touch with our legal team and call a Skyglobe emergency board meeting and activate our voting shares, citing shareholder concerns over discriminatory practices, airlines now rather than tomorrow procedures and possible civil rights abuses. She stopped to observe Bradley Winters, who was currently having a somewhat heated discussion with Richard Bronson, the supervisor, who had refused to let her board, and Marcus carried out Plan Delta. She didn't simply make up the dramatic term Plan Delta for effect. It was a tactic created years ago for circumstances similar to this one when discrimination endangered not just her self-respect but also the soundness of her economic dealings. As Elise concluded the after speaking with Marcus, she promptly contacted her CFO, legal counsel, and the head of her public relations team. Every discussion lasted under 30 seconds, and each one started anew. The security personnel continued to hover close by as part of her reaction, but now they appeared unsure. One continued to look at his radio in anticipation of instructions. The other was looking directly at Elise, clearly recognizing her, as if attempting to place Bradley Winters was now making angry gestures across the terminal in Elise's guidance, while conversing with an airport policeman based on his body language, and he was clearly attempting to have her removed from the airport, completely based on his sporadic looks in her direction. Bradley's voice echoed throughout the room as his tone rose. She's being disruptive and threatening our staff. I'm so frustrated that I want her to be hauled out of this terminal right away. Sadly, a small bunch of travelers, including some who had previously been filming the altercation, started to publicly endorse Bradley's a middle-aged man wearing a golf shirt said, "Get her out of here." She's holding everyone else up because people don't know how to act in public, a lady continued. Then the most repulsive above all, a red-faced guy who appeared empowered by the increasing animosity said, "Go fly with your own kind." Even several people who had previously been silently critical were shocked by the overt racism that pervaded the atmosphere. Passengers were uneasy about the overt animosity that was now visible. Others left because they didn't want to be connected to such obvious bigotry. But when the airport policeman approached Elise, something unexpected occurred. Rather than right away, he paused before escorting her out, his eyes widening slightly in recognition, and he said, "Miss Washington?" The cop with the name tag officer was Elise Washington of Nexus Technologies, who spoke quietly. She was known to James Taylor from a recent cover story in Business Weekly, publication featuring America's most powerful black CEOs. "You were just featured on the cover of Business Weekly," he said quietly, adding, "My daughter completed her school report on you last month, and as a result, she wants to become a software developer." Brief realization that she was being viewed as who she really was instead of Officer Taylor's attitude was altered by the prejudicial assumptions that were made about her, placed himself discreetly between Elise and the growingly antagonistic group of travelers. It wasn't clear, but he had decided whose security he was putting first, and then it. The electronic departure boards flashed all across the terminal. In the waiting rooms, the CNN airport network displays briefly went dark before returning with a cracking sound. Financial news. The article breaking was displayed by the chyron at the bottom of the screen. Amid reports of a significant shareholder sell-off, Sky Airlines' stock fell. People started pointing at the screens and whispering to one another across the airport. Some took out their phones to check out their investment applications. Terminal B's atmosphere somewhat changed. Financial analysts were already on the televisions when the financial drama started to eclipse the personal one. Regarding the reason behind the abrupt stock movement, one person brought up unverified claims of discriminating events and possible civil rights abuses that may reveal the airline Marcus Chen had wasted little time in carrying out Plan Delta Bradley Winters due to serious legal liabilities. The phone kept ringing and his face was now flushed with rage, drained of color as he looked at his phone's screen. He moved over to answer the call, his whole manner changing abruptly from hostile to defensive. The CEO of Sky Globe walked back and forth from time to time. Whatever he was hearing on the other end of that phone, he looked towards Elise with increasing worry and recognition. Was obviously heartbreaking news. Other Sky Globe officials in the terminal who was at the airport that day when we started getting similar calls. The panic circulated clearly among the employees when news got out through whispers and wide-eyed looks. Before a fresh disturbance at the terminal entrance caught everyone's attention, a group headed by a young woman in her 30s, a group of men and women in spotless suits marched deliberately through the doors with the Samantha Rivera, a police executive, exudes confidence as someone who has successfully traversed corporate battles on a regular basis. An aide had shown there with reinforcements, and 4 members of the Nexus Technologies legal team followed her, each with leather portfolios and statements that would cause any business leader to reevaluate their life decisions. Samantha saw Elise right away and went straight to the legal staff as perfectly aligned with the materials you asked for. Samantha replied as she gave the board members and Elise a compact leather portfolio. Have been informed, Elise, that they will be gathering by video conference in 30 minutes. Nodded, retrieved the portfolio, and opened it to examine its contents. Printouts of Sky Globe's own anti-discrimination regulations were smoothed out with her staff now by her side. Her jacket and started to move away from the exit, contrary to Bradley's request, but Officer Taylor made no attempt to return to Gate 37B, where her altercation had started. Stop her. The security officers exchanged apprehensive glances and got no clear directives over their radios. Since Sky Globe's line of command was Elise, now in chaos, strode purposefully with her legal team by her side like a hero. Passengers moved aside, some using their phones to record, while others watched with the enthralled face of those who observe history without yet completely comprehending it. As she got closer, the airport's PA system burst to life in the gate area. Attention! Everyone, passengers. All Sky Globe Airlines flights are affected by an administrative action, are momentarily grounded. Travelers on Sky Globe should wait for more details. We sincerely regret any. The warning was repeated in Spanish, Mandarin, and French, which caused trouble. Passengers in the Skylby stared up in bewilderment and increasing rage across the airport. Gate agents were abruptly, the airline's operations have essentially stalled after being inundated with enquiries they were unable to respond to. At the far end of the terminal, Bradley Winters was still on his phone when he looked up at the news with a look of utter terror. At that same time, he made the connection between the discrimination against the lady by his workers and the financial ruin now enveloping him. Elise had not only been turned away, she had lost her dignity when she was refused boarding or a first-class seat. And now Sky. The scenario was set for a confrontation, as Globe Airlines was about to discover just how expensive that error would be. That would permanently alter the aviation business. Elise versus Bradley Winters' discrimination against justice, old biases against new authority. And it was going to happen in front of hundreds of people, thousands of people watching on social media, and millions of Gate 37B had changed from a standard airport gate to stockholders. The introduction of what would eventually be known as the Sky Globe Reckoning. There was immediate turmoil as a result of all planes being grounded, and hundreds of customers swarmed the customer service desks requesting justifications, reimbursements, and alternate transportation arrangements. It's ridiculous that all planes are stopped, and I have a connecting flight to catch. I spent hundreds for my ticket. Someone has to fully explain what's going on with the Sky Globe crew right now. unprepared for this circumstance, did what terrified individuals frequently do when confronted with an enraged mob, sought a scapegoat, and Elise was their choice. Washington, ma'am, none of this would have happened if you hadn't interfered with our boarding procedures. Meredith, the gatekeeper who had first questioned Elise's ticket, made a loud enough announcement for passengers in the vicinity to hear Supervisor Richard Bronson participate in this. Our activities have been severely disrupted by a woman who was unable to follow basic instructions. At first, their plan seemed to succeed for a few of passengers, became enraged again and turned to Elise, accusing her of being the cause of their trip problems. Our planes were canceled because of her. One man said, "Why is one individual permitted to sabotage hundreds of people's travel arrangements?" Another yelled. Elise and her legal team officer were surrounded by a hostile crowd. Sensing the growing tension, Taylor moved closer to her. What transpired next would rank among the year's most watched viral videos. Elise calmly and resolutely left her legal team and went to "My name is Elise," she said as she climbed elegantly onto a chair in the adjacent row of chairs to stand out from the crowd. She said, "Washington," her voice echoing through the gate area with the same dominant presence that has enthralled audiences in conference rooms and boardrooms throughout the globe. "I am the CEO of Horizon Capital's founder and Nexus Technologies." The mere act of asserting her identity and the refusal to be deleted or diminished instantly modified the atmosphere in the terminal. Several travelers took out their phones to look up her name, their eyes widening when they did. Speaking, "I arrived at this airport today as a paying passenger with a legitimate. I was refused boarding a first-class ticket, just like many of you, not because of anything I did wrong, but because of what it appears that a silence descended over the surrounding region as travelers paused to. She appeared to convince even those who had previously been unfriendly to listen. Dignified presence. The events of today are not unique to me. They occur to everybody who looks similar to me every day at airports around the nation. But today it happened to someone who had the authority to demand responsibility. Bradley Winters reached the gate at that same time. He was panting from running across the terminal, and he paused as he saw Elise standing far above everyone's attention as being demanded by the crowd, and as CEO and executive from Sky Globe leaned in, believing it should be his alone. As urgently murmured in his ear, Bradley's face changed from one of rage to be startled to a state of dread as he at last realized who Elise, what Washington was, and how much influence she had on his business. The circumstances increased even more when local news stations and the first media teams arrived. Had received information about a story that was emerging at LaGuardia. Cameras and microphones seemed to be pushing. Bradley rushed right away to stop them as they were passing through the throng to get closer to the scene. "This is a private concern about Sky Globe Airlines. This location is off limits to the media, but officer, this is a public terminal, sir, and the media has every right to be here," Taylor said. "To be present as long as they don't obstruct security measures." The cameras turned on immediately. Towards Bradley and the officer's altercation, expressing the Sky Globe CEO's mounting annoyance and anxiety, Elise went on talking, now conscious that her remarks were being aired outside of the Today Sky Globe terminal. "Airlines revealed their actual nature to me, to all of us, and now to the you might be surprised to learn that I own 28% of Sky Globes through my investing company, Horizon Capital. Equity, making me the company's biggest shareholder." As a result, there were gasps and whispers. Through the crowd, a few of formerly aggressive passengers now appear noticeably uneasy. Bradley Winters pushed desperate to get control of the situation. He made his way through the crowd to where Elise was standing with a mask over his face. He started loud enough for the cameras to record him saying, "There's forced hospitality, Miss Washington." Obviously been a horrible miscommunication. On behalf of Sky Globe Airlines, I would want Elise gaze down at him with the composed expression. "I personally apologize for any inconvenience you've experienced today." The eyes of someone who has spent her whole career interacting with individuals like Bradley, who felt that a straightforward apology could eliminate deeply embedded habits of discrimination. "This is about systematic prejudice ingrained in your system, Mr. Winters, not about inconvenience. Discrimination in the workplace that you have deliberately encouraged," and Bradley's fake smile faded. But I can tell you that Sky Globe has stringent anti-discrimination laws that are in place in theory, but not in reality. Elise interrupted. Samantha gave her a tablet as she turned to face her. Over the last 6 months, my team has been recording instances of discrimination at Sky Globe and on its flights, facilities. This was the shocking discovery that nobody had expected. Elise displayed a report on the tablet that included the dates, hours, and specifics of dozens of several occurrences accompanied by testimonies and photographic proof. I exclaimed, "Mystery shoppers on people from many ethnicities, faiths, and backgrounds are flying on your airline." With similar itinerary and tickets, the differences in their treatment are not only upsetting, but they are also legally actionable. As the ramifications set in, Bradley's face turned pale from crimson. Camera teams pressed in, attempting to capture every second of his obvious sorrow. "Miss Washington," dropping his voice once more, "perhaps we could talk about this in private. We are pleased to offer you our business jet to Singapore, where we can talk about making up for today's regrettable." Elisa responded calmly but firmly, saying, "Today wasn't bad, Mr. Winters. It was unavoidable to create a business culture that prioritizes exclusion than inclusion when you write off diversity programs as publicity gimmicks." When Bradley's eyes widened, when you told your coworkers that some people don't know where they belong, hearing a quote from himself that you couldn't have heard. I heard everything Elise said was straightforward. And more significantly, I've been hearing your travelers, staff members, and the communities you say you serve as though on a black woman in her middle years emerged from the crowd. "I have been operating Sky Globe for 15 years. Traveler," she added, her voice trembling a little. "I was chosen at random for every time an old Asian guy joined. Further screening was conducted," said. "They made me change seats last month because a white passenger didn't want to sit next to me." The plane. The attendant said that it was for everyone's comfort. Passengers started one by one, discussing their own encounters with prejudice on Sky Globe flight's narrative that builds on the previous one to paint a scathing picture of a company's culture, based on prejudice and exclusion. In the meanwhile, the travelers who had previously racist remarks that had been shouted started to subtly leave the area, obviously wishing to flee before being discovered. But in the era of social media and cell phones, nothing stays secret for very long. A number of bystanders had already taped these videos, and remarks were already making the rounds on Instagram and Twitter. Elise allowed everyone to talk, identifying them with hashtags, weight and acknowledgement to stories that were too frequently disregarded or rejected. After they were done, she spoke to the throng at Gate 37B, as well as the increasing global viewership of live broadcasts. Discrimination isn't. She claimed that Sky Globe Airlines has been losing money, and that it is just immoral and terrible business. Market share for 8 quarters in a row, due to its refusal to accept that things have changed. Consumers of today want better, expect better, and deserve better. I came here today not simply as a passenger, but she turned right to Bradley. As someone assessing your airline for a possible business deal for $3 billion additionally, I was thinking about purchasing a whole set of Nexus Technologies will extend its transport network with Sky Globe. Division Bradley Winters appeared as if he would pass out right there. Potential agreements she brought up were the lifeblood his faltering airline sorely needed. Had just witnessed go because of discriminatory actions taken by his own firm. However, given my experiences and documentation, Elise went on to say that I am unable to really suggest Sky Globe to my partners or take it into consideration for acquisition, but not without basic alterations to its culture and leadership. By this point, the conflict had escalated to the highest social media trends, include Elise Washington and Sky Globe reckoning, were popular all around the world, and hundreds of thousands of people watched the live streaming at once. Observing the revelation of decades' worth of discriminatory airline behavior in real time, things became much more heated as 3 Sky Globe's members, after being informed of the situation, the board of directors arrived at the terminal and made their way there with obvious, quickly seeing the disastrous harm being done to the company's stock worth and reputation. Ms. Tech Washington, the primary director, stated that as each minute went on, we would want to call an urgent board meeting since we recognize and value your concerns." Police agreed. That's exactly what I need to do right now to address these issues. The gang proceeded to a special airport lounge that had been called for an hour earlier. Hurriedly prepared for the last-minute board meeting, with Bradley Winters trailing noticeably trembling cameras his every action. The distinction between his prior self-assured swagger and his, without a single word, the complete message was conveyed by the dejected stance inside the now that other travelers have left the airport's VIP lounge. Sky Globe's board members have physically gathered, and the faces of directors who were unable to attend were displayed on essentially large screens, but joined through a video conference, and each one of them wore Elise and her legal team presented their evidence with statements of serious worry. Destructively and methodically, the documentation was unquestionable. Bradley's emails downplaying diversity issues. Statistics demonstrating trends of testimony from former workers regarding specific instances of unfair treatment orders to handle some passengers differently than others. As the lecture went on, his cheeks flushed a frightening scarlet, and he unfastened his tie as his breathing grew labored. Despite the coolness of the lounge, a bead of crimson sweat formed on his forehead halfway through the presentation of proof. While Elise described how Sky Globe had lost 3 significant business clients due to prejudice in the past, Bradley abruptly seized his chest and fell into his chair, saying, I can't." He gasped before slumping sideways. The room erupted in panic. Is there a doctor?" someone exclaimed, and the cops immediately assumed control. She instructed one of the board members to quickly call an ambulance, and then she assisted Bradley in getting into a recovery position on the floor and fully untied his tie. It was a powerful picture. It was the lady who had every reason to hate this man who was now making sure he was taken care of in his crisis situation, even as Bradley Winters dealt with the fallout from his actions. When the paramedics came, Elise, Washington showed the empathy and compassion he had denied to so many others. It was discovered in a matter of minutes that Bradley was exhibiting signs of a serious panic attack, combined with a severe stress response rather than a heart attack as first thought. As they were ready to take him to the hospital, he looked up at Elise and seemed genuinely shocked by her. Intervention on his behalf. The board meeting was rescheduled while Bradley was en route to the hospital. The directors are now well cognizant of the severity of the predicament they are confronting. The business promptly went to damage control after less than half an hour of after careful consideration. The board chairman declared that the airline had been forced to close because a lease had been pulled. Bradley Winters would be banned right away for selling her stock until a complete to maintain objectivity. An inquiry would be conducted, and a temporary CEO would be chosen from outside the present executive team, and the and aid in the airline's reconstruction. Additionally, the board unanimously authorized the establishment of an impartial committee to look into instances of discrimination across the company and suggest all-encompassing changes. They asked Elise's group to discuss their complete documents with this committee. The board chairman spoke directly to Elise as the meeting came to an end. "Miss Washington, we are unable to reverse what has occurred to you and many others today, others throughout the years, but we can pledge to make sure it doesn't occur again. Would appreciate your advice during this transformational process." The police response was, "Real change calls for more than committees and apologies. It must be measured but resolute. Calls for a significant cultural change from the top down. I'll be attentively observing to determine whether Sky Globe is actually devoted to that shift." As Elise and her colleagues left the lounge, she discovered the rage that had met her before had been converted by the terminal, swapped out with something completely different, such as respect, adoration, and in many cases of appreciation. Travelers came forward to shake her hand. Airport employees who had been reluctant to intervene before, they nodded in recognition as she went by, and the media saw they were recording a significant event in corporate America and capturing each instant. The altercation at Gate 37B turned out to be only the start of a change that would affect not only Sky Globe Airlines but the whole industry. But 1 week after the altercation at the gate, the most unexpected events were still to occur. 37B. The world saw an unparalleled event in the history of flying. Journalists from all around the world crowded Manhattan's Grand Ballroom. The sky globe emblem, formerly a remnant of a bygone era, the sign of grandeur, now hung behind the podium. Notably, Dr. Janet Rivera was the first Latina to serve as temporary board chair. Position at a large airline came up to the microphone, and the room collapsed. Silence. Following thorough deliberation and initial results from our internal audit, the board of directors has decided to the tough but essential choice to halt all Skylobe activities with immediate effect. Immediately after the news, the industry experienced unprecedented shockwaves. Had a Skylobe-sized airline willingly ground its whole fleet, more than 250 planes would be sitting idle at airports unless there was a national emergency. More than 21,000 workers would be put on paid leave worldwide. The monetary expense throughout what was referred to as a thorough reorganization was astounding, valued at more than $35 million daily. Dr. Rivera's introduction made it apparent that doing business as normal would have come at a much higher cost. Some have queried why such an extreme step is required, Rivera said, her voice calm and steadfast. My response is straightforward. There are instances when you have to demolish the foundation to correctly rebuild sky globes as problems aren't trivial ones that can be resolved with policy memoranda or sensitivity training. The discrimination was ingrained in the organization's culture from the top down to the day-to-day operations. The somber expressions of the board were captured by the cameras as they panned around the room. Members who had realized the whole scope of their business's shortcomings. Many had first opposed the notion of a total closure, while lobbying for less drastic solutions. But the first audit results have stifled those criticisms throughout the week after the LaGuardia incident. According to Sky Globe, ticketing desks were deserted at terminals that have become ghost towns worldwide. Check-in kiosks showed notices stating that they were momentarily unavailable. With the exception of the few employees doing necessary aircraft preservation work, maintenance hangars were silent. A time-lapse video at JFK Airport showed the Sky Globe fleet being transported to faraway stands. Their engines obscured their livery, and they abruptly seemed to be relics from a business that had already belongs to the past. The aviation industry is used to operating continuously. Regardless of the situation, one of its oldest members stared in shock. Voluntarily ceased operations, but Sky Globe Airlines will continue to. Dr. Rivera remained open at the press conference until we had put fresh leadership in implementing new regulations and cultural protections that guarantee each traveler and every employee, regardless of gender or ethnicity, is treated with respect and decency, religion or upbringing. What few anticipated was the deep regret conveyed by some of the very workers who had participated in the culture of discrimination. In Meredith Thompson, the gate attendant who initially refused Elise boarding, talked, in an emotional interview with CNN. Emotions about her own involvement. I've worked for Sky Globe for 10 years, and she said, I never once questioned the patterns I was engaging in. We were instructed to give particular passengers more attention, but this practice was never specifically referred to as racial profiling. Was coded to allude to passenger or security concerns. Since then, Meredith had offered to serve on an employee group that collaborated with the independent auditors to recognize and deal with unfair acts. I am unable to undo what I have done. However, I can assist ensure that it doesn't happen again. In the meantime, at New York Presbyterian, Bradley Winters Hospital was recuperating from what physicians had determined to be TV video of a stress-induced cardiovascular event revealed him. His reaction as he watched the news conference announcing the airline suspension, changing from incredulity to anything approaching comprehension as the whole. Those close to him claim that the effects of his leadership were evident. During his recuperation, Bradley had remained unusually silent, refusing to make remarks or present a defense of his behavior. A hospital employee claimed to have heard him state that she was. It was unclear, though, if he had met Elise or someone else. 2 weeks into the shutdown, the first conclusions from independent auditors were far more devastating than expected. Within days after the audit was made public, the repercussions went well beyond Sky Globe. In obvious dread of similar situations, other airlines started unveiling their own diversity efforts. Examination United Airlines initiated a thorough examination of its customer service procedures, Delta set up an American Airlines implemented required anti-discrimination measures and established an independent monitoring body for discrimination complaints. All staff training. What we're observing in aviation. Maria Chen, an industry analyst, is having an unparalleled period of introspection. The Sky Globe disaster has compelled every airline in the whole industry to carrier to address behaviors they have disregarded or rejected for many years. 3. The aviation scene was clearly changing months after the LaGuardia conflict. The Department of Transportation unveiled new rules mandating that airlines monitor and disclose information on how passengers are treated by race and additional demographic variables. Certification was created by industry groups. Initiatives to promote fairness in customer service. Insurance firms started providing reduced fares to airlines who have strong anti-discrimination policies at Gate 37B of LaGuardia Airport, where renovations had started and the Sky Globe signs had been taken down. However, the teaser was displayed on a new sign wrapped in blue construction wrap. Soon, a new method of flight was developed behind the walls, constructing a fully renovated gate area with multilingual prayer rooms and accessibility improvements. 6 months after operations were halted, signs and artwork that was inclusive of all cultures, with new management, new rules, and a renewed dedication to inclusivity, Sky Globe Airlines took to the sky once more. Their first captain, Diane, flew the landmark flight from New York to Singapore. Rodriguez served as the lead flight and was the airline's first Latina chief pilot. Michael Chen, an attendant, had previously sued the airline for discrimination but had since returned. Bradley Winters never returned to the aviation business under the new administration, but according to reports, he had started working as a volunteer for neighborhood groups that promoted economic possibilities for young people of color. Unexpected conclusion to a career characterized more by exclusion than by inclusion. It all started when a woman refused to tolerate being turned away, and the airline industry would never be the same. Proper boarding and seating. If this tale touched you, please press the like and subscribe buttons. Click now and spread the word so others can also learn.